I had a conversation with someone once and they actually said that they never pay attention to quiet people. And that should sound obvious, but to me it's so strange because I always pay attention to quiet people. When I'm in a room, the person I pay most attention to is the one who is the most quiet. But then again, usually I'm the quiet one in a room. But I guess it saddened me a bit to see that most people do not value silence as much, or so it appears based on the conversations I had. Of course, there is a danger of romanticizing quietude, quietness, and it's not what I'm trying to do here, claiming that being quiet is somehow better than being loud or talkative or whatever the opposite of quiet may be in a certain context. But I also think there are various ways of being quiet, and everyone has a bit of quiet in them. And when I say quiet, I don't mean being quiet all the time or not speaking at all. What I want to do in this video is to focus on various ways, various kinds of quietness, so that you can discover which ones are your strengths and which ones you may want to work on a bit more. Either way, quietness, quietude, quiet can work to our advantage in many ways. And everyone has a different brand of quiet to work for them. I went to a scout camp once where I had to participate in a challenge of not speaking for a day, and I was actually much more talkative than I am now. But later that day, I figured it was pointless, so I gave up. And it's interesting, I didn't give up because I couldn't take it. I gave up because I thought it was pointless. And I think I might have not understood the value of intentional silence back then. And of course, there are many reasons why we speak, but sometimes choosing not to speak can be a marker of how we value ourselves. For example, how many times did you say something because you thought you should have? Because you felt a responsibility to keep the conversation going or to entertain the other person as if you just being there wasn't enough. If we don't always choose to speak, we assert that we matter, whether or not we have something to say at any given moment. We are human beings, not human doings or human sayings. We matter intrinsically, whether or not we constantly try to prove to the world that we do through expressing it in some way, verbal way in this context. And when you put out words into the world, they're not 100% yours anymore. So it matters what you do put out. It shapes who you are and how you think of yourself. Not just what you say, but what you choose not to say. Quiet, as a noun, used to mean freedom from disturbance or conflict, calm, stillness. And the adjective, peaceable, at rest, restful, tranquil. And as a verb, it meant to subdue, lessen. And to be fair, don't we all need some of that today? Wouldn't that also make us more aware, more attuned to the world, more patient, even? And do keep in mind that the opposite of quiet is not actually volume or loudness. It's disquiet, a fairly negative emotion, which assumes that quietness, quietude, might actually be considered a virtue. And this might mean that when people ask you, why are you so quiet? Instead of interpreting as, why don't you talk more? You can turn it around and think of it more in terms of, how do you do it? I'd like to be more like you. So from now on, when someone asks me, why are you so quiet? Which happens sometimes, I will say, or I will think, I know, right? It's so great, you should try it. I used to internalize my silences, and then even when I was on my own, I could feel their heaviness within me, making me feel out of touch with myself. But then I decided to practice externalizing my quiet, making it an expression and extension of myself. And now when I do it, I feel much more friendly with myself. And the thing is, if I'm communicating with myself, I don't need actual words or sounds to do it. And if I get rid of these most basic layers of communication, or at least I subdue them, then I actually have easier access to myself anyway. And even if you do use words to communicate with yourself, not speaking them out can make them more thoughtful at times. For example, writing for yourself can be very intimate. On the one hand, you are speaking out, metaphorically, but on the other, you're not really saying anything or sharing anything with the world. It is an act of asserting that having a conversation with yourself can be valuable too. That not sharing things in the world all the time and being quiet can be an act of value and intimacy. Though of course there is always a time and place for everything. I'm not saying we should be quiet all the time, because I wouldn't have a YouTube channel without speaking and sharing things. It's always the quiet ones, I once said, and ironically, no one heard me. I wanted to repeat that because I liked that line, but I was worried someone actually did hear me, so I wasted my moment, but it doesn't matter because it's true. If we consider talking and expressing ourselves in social situations as a default, which we tend to do, then being quiet might be considered as holding something in, not as having nothing, but as intentionally choosing not to express it. And when you hold something in, there is often something beneath it, which means quiet is not a lack, but rather a layer. I do think quietness has a volume of its own. There are various shades of silence, and if we listen to them closely, if we pay attention to them, we might actually learn a lot about someone. And of course, we can never find out everything about a person without speaking to them, but as speaking has its shades and colors, so does silence, and I think it's just as important. And to move on from being quiet itself, I want to talk about the so-called quiet life. If we look at louder lives, even though there's nothing inherently wrong with them, of course, everyone can live however they like, they are often about implicitly or explicitly communicating to other people about how much one has in terms of a beautiful apartment or a great job or anything else. But if we live a quiet, simple life, where not much always happens on the surface, there is no proof of its substance, because a lot of its intensity and excitement happens within, or in privacy. And it's similar with talking. If we cannot be happy in silence, slowness, and simplicity, then is there anything we can say or possess or do that will eventually make us happy? I'm not saying we shouldn't say or do or possess anything, just to realize how fleeting it all is, and that the other side of the coin matters too. A quiet life is actually quite a challenge, I would say. It's easy to talk because you automatically get lost in the cacophony of voices, but in silence, within a more quiet, subdued life. Though I would argue that an outwardly quiet life can be very, very intense within. You have no other option but to face yourself. And that can be terrifying unless you see it for what it is, and that, to me, is freedom. And of course, we don't have to choose black or white, quiet life or not quiet life. It's just about asking ourselves if we are capable of leading a quiet life. And if not, then maybe that tells us something about whether or not we're fully honest with ourselves and fully free. Sometimes we need to be quiet before we let someone speak. We may think logically that it's the other way around. We say something, and then someone says something and we are silent because we're listening to them, but sometimes we're inviting people to say something to us if we listen first. I know it can be pretty awkward when you meet a new person and then you're both quiet and it doesn't feel like you're letting someone speak. It feels like things are just awkward. But, metaphorically, sometimes listening comes first, because if someone knows that you're there to listen, then they will be more likely to speak. And similarly, I've been thinking about death a lot recently, and I've been thinking about this 1 minute of silence tradition and how it is a form of listening. We are listening to our loss. We are listening to the silence of the person that had once been here with us but is not there anymore. And of course, I know there's a lot to it, but I do see it as a form of listening in a way. Sorry, I kind of just sat there for a minute and stopped speaking. It's fitting. I hear dogs barking. You probably hear them too. As I said, I'm sorry. This was supposed to be a quiet video with a quiet setting and a quiet background and quiet everything, but I guess you can't control the world's quiet. You can only control yours, so that's a good analogy. Corresponds to the waiting video I remember. It's actually so funny. Each time I'm recording something about tranquility and quietness, it's really loud outside. Last time when I recorded a video about waiting, I had to wait until the sounds outside were gone. And now I'm recording a video about quietness, and there's something going on all the time. But I'll choose to give in and listen, because that's what we're doing in this video. And I'm gonna follow suit. Well, I guess asking you which quiet are you is kind of pointless, because you're never one or the other. This is obviously not black and white, but I think it's still beneficial to look at which quiet you're good at, which you can use to your advantage, which can be your strength, which can make you more confident and at peace, and which you should still work on. At the end of the day, we will never understand anything unless we go quiet and listen and talk to ourselves and just sit with ourselves and with the quietness and think or feel or live, not say, not do, just go quiet. But I've been contradicting myself for the past 10 to 20 minutes or so, so I think it's time for me to go quiet too. And I invite you to do the same. But thank you for listening. Oh, actually there is a bonus. And sometimes you don't need an explanation. Sometimes you just don't want to talk. And that's that.